The rain started on a Tuesday, and it didn't stop for 3 days. It was a kind of persistent, soul-soaking Pennsylvania rain that turned the world 100 shades of gray and made the Susquehanna River swell with cold, brown water. On Thursday afternoon, the rain finally broke, but the gray remained, hanging heavy in the air like an unasked question. That was when the knock came. Margaret Miller was in her kitchen, her hands deep in flour, kneading dough for bread she made every Thursday. At 68, her hands ached with arthritis, but the familiar, rhythmic work was a comfort. It was a day like any other, quiet and ordered. The sound of the sharp, official rap on her front door was a disruption. A note played out of key. She wiped her hands on her apron, a faint unease settling in her stomach as she walked through the silent house. Through the beveled glass, she saw the silhouette of a man in a sheriff's uniform. Her heart seized. It was Sheriff Brody, a man she'd known since he was a boy stealing apples from her neighbor's tree. His face, when she opened the door, was grim. He took off his hat, twisting the brim in his hands. "Margaret," he began, his voice low and heavy. "There's been an accident down at the river. It's about David." The world tilted. The sound of the neighborhood, a distant dog barking, a car passing on the wet street, faded into a low hum. "An accident?" she repeated, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "He was fishing with Marcus Thorne," Brody explained, his eyes not quite meeting hers. He said David slipped on the rocks near the deep end. "The current is strong, Margaret." Marcus tried to reach him, but he was gone too fast. "The search team is out there now, but it doesn't look good." Margaret stood there, clutching the door frame for support. It didn't make sense. David was a swimmer. He was strong. He knew that river, every rock and every current, like he knew the lines on his own hand. "No," she said, her voice a whisper. "Not David. He wouldn't just slip." Sheriff Brody's face was a mask of professional pity. "The rocks are slick from the rain, Margaret," he said gently. "It can happen to anyone." But my mother's instinct, a force more certain than any evidence, screamed that this was wrong. This was not the shape of a tragedy. It was the shape of a lie. Just 2 weeks earlier, that same house had been filled with laughter. It was David and Amelia's 5th wedding anniversary. He'd insisted they celebrate at his mother's, with her home cooking. David was like that, despite his success as a civil engineer, despite the beautiful modern home he and Amelia had built across town. He was still his mother's son, grounded in the simple traditions of his childhood. The scene was perfect. David, handsome and beaming, his arm wrapped around his beautiful wife, Amelia. She was radiant, her smile as bright as the diamond on her finger. She had always been a work of art, with her elegant clothes and her refined way of speaking that made everyone else in their small town feel a little bit clumsy. She was telling a story about a recent trip to a New York art gallery, her hands gesturing gracefully, captivating everyone except Margaret. Margaret watched from the kitchen doorway, a small, tight knot forming in her chest. She saw the way Amelia's eyes would glaze over when Margaret told a story about David's childhood. She saw the way Amelia would subtly correct David's grammar at the dinner table, a small, condescending smile playing on her lips. She saw a woman who loved the idea of a successful husband from a humble background, but who seemed to have very little patience for the humble background itself. Later that night, as David was helping his mother with the dishes, he noticed her quietness. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked, nudging her gently. "You've been quiet all night." Margaret sighed, scrubbing at a stubborn spot on a plate. "It's nothing, dear. I'm just tired." "It's Amelia, isn't it?" he pressed. "You still don't like her." "It's not that I don't like her, David," Margaret said, finally turning to him, her eyes full of worry he never understood. "It's just she doesn't see you. She sees a painting she wants to hang on her wall. A successful husband, a perfect life. But the frame is more important to her than the picture inside." David had gotten angry. "Of course. You're not being fair, Mom. She loves me. We're happy." He had dried his hands, kissed her on the cheek, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving the conversation and his mother's fears hanging in the air. That was the last time they had spoken about it. Now, standing on her porch with Sheriff Brody, Margaret's words from that night echoed back to her, a chilling, terrible premonition. What no one saw, what happened in the quiet spaces between the perfect dinner parties, was the rot. The affair between Amelia and Marcus hadn't started with passion. It had started with shared complaint. It was at a summer barbecue, 6 months before the fishing trip. David was at the grill, laughing with friends. Margaret was inside, fussing over potato salad. Amelia and Marcus found themselves alone on the back patio. "I don't know how he lives like this," Amelia said, swirling the wine in her glass as she looked at David. "So content, so simple. He has no ambition beyond this little town." Marcus, who had always felt simmering resentment at David's easy success and effortless charm, nodded in agreement. "He's had it easy," Marcus said, his voice low. "Always a golden boy. Never had to really fight for anything." In that shared moment of resentment, a spark was lit. Their conversations became more frequent, more secretive. A chance meeting for coffee. A late-night text when David was asleep. They were drawn together by a mutual, toxic envy of the man they were both supposed to love. The idea, when it first came, was whispered as a dark joke. They were complaining about money. Amelia wanted to renovate the kitchen. Marcus was deep in debt from a failed business venture. "Too bad David doesn't have a rich uncle who could just disappear," Marcus had said. Amelia didn't laugh. She just looked at him, her eyes cold and calculating. "He has a life insurance policy," she said quietly. "A big one." The joke was no longer a joke. It became a plan. At first, Marcus was hesitant. This was David, his best friend since kindergarten. But Amelia was a master manipulator. She played on his ego, his resentments, his greed. She painted a picture of a life they could have together. A life of wealth, of freedom, of travel. A life without David. "He's holding us both back, Marcus," she whispered to him one night in a cheap motel an hour out of town. "He's a ball and chain on my potential, and you're forever living in his shadow. With him gone, we could finally be who we were meant to be." It was she who planned the details. The fishing trip, a place David trusted. The river, high and fast in the spring, a perfect excuse for an accident. The timing, just before they were supposed to meet friends for dinner, giving Marcus a solid alibi for his whereabouts later that evening. She was the architect of my Una living. Marcus was just a tool she used to build it. The official search was called off after 3 days. A memorial service was held. The whole town came to pay their respects to the handsome young engineer tragically lost to the river. Amelia's performance was breathtaking. She wept, but not too much. She spoke of their love in a voice thick with sorrow. Marcus stood beside her, his hand on her back, the very picture of the supportive, grieving best friend. Margaret watched him from the front pew, a cold, hard knot of certainty forming in her gut. This was wrong. All of it. The way they stood too close. The way their eyes would meet over the heads of the mourners, sharing a secret no one else could see. The way their grief felt rehearsed, like a scene from a bad movie. After the service, at the reception held at their house, Margaret cornered Sheriff Brody. "You need to look at them," she said, her voice a low, intense hiss, nodding towards Amelia and Marcus, who were accepting condolences by the fireplace. "Look at them. That is not grief. That is relief." Brody sighed, his face weary. "Margaret, people handle loss in different ways. They're finding comfort in each other. It's natural." "It's been 3 weeks, Bill," she said, using his first name for the first time in years. 3 weeks, and she's already laughing with him. She hasn't shed a real tear since the day you came to my door. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his patience fraying. "I have a statement from an eyewitness, Marcus Thorne. I have no evidence of anything else. My hands are tied." But Margaret wouldn't let it go. Her suspicion became an obsession. She started going to the police station every Friday. At first, they were patient, then annoyed, then dismissive. She became Friday Margaret, the grieving mother who couldn't accept the truth. And then, 8 months after I was gone, the final confirmation of her darkest fears arrived. An invitation in the mail, embossed with elegant calligraphy. "Amelia Thorne and Marcus Thorne request the honor of your presence at their marriage ceremony." They were getting married. My wife and my best friend. Not even a year after my disappearance. Margaret held the invitation in her trembling hands, and a quiet, not a suspicion, in her gut erupted into a raging fire of certainty. This was not a love story born from shared sorrow. This was the final act of a successful conspiracy. Her war for justice had just begun. In her grief and fury, Margaret did something she would later question, something that would cast a long, dark shadow of doubt over her own intentions. A week after receiving the wedding invitation, she called Marcus. He answered, his voice wary. "Marcus," she said, her own voice dangerously calm. "I need to see you." They met at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. He slid into the booth opposite her, refusing to meet her eyes. "What do you want, Margaret?" he asked. She looked at him, at the face of the boy she had practically raised alongside her own son. "I want to know why," she said. "Why so soon? Doesn't it look wrong?" Marcus shrugged, stirring his coffee. "We fell in love, Margaret. It just happened. We couldn't help it." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes boring into him. "You were his best friend, Marcus, and she was his wife. And my son, my David, he's gone. And you too are celebrating." The bitterness in her voice was acid. He finally looked up, and she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Fear? She couldn't be sure. "We're not celebrating," he said defensively. "We're trying to move on." And then Margaret, pushed by a wave of rage and helplessness, said the words that would haunt the investigation for years to come. "He was so blind," she hissed, her voice a low whisper. He never saw how she was using him, how unhappy she was. Someone needed to open his eyes. Someone needed to do something drastic to shake him loose from her. "You were his best friend, Marcus. You should have done something. You should have saved him from her." It was an outburst of a grieving mother, a desperate wish that things had been different. But to an outsider, to a police officer listening to a recording, to a jury, it could have sounded like something else entirely. It could have sounded like a motive. It could have sounded like she was asking him, pleading with him, to get her son away from his wife by any means necessary. Marcus left the diner that day looking pale and shaken, and Margaret was left alone with the echo of her own reckless words, never realizing she had just handed her son's murderers their greatest weapon, a perfect red herring. For 8 long years, the river kept its secret. My mother, Margaret, continued her lonely crusade, her Friday visits to the police station becoming a sad, familiar fixture. Detective Miller, who replaced the retired Sheriff Brody, inherited her. He listened with professional patience as she presented her theories, her timelines, her endless, circling suspicions about Amelia and Marcus. He would nod, promise to look into it, and then file her notes away in the cold case file for David Miller accidental drowning. Amelia and Marcus lived a life of quiet luxury. They sold my old house and moved into a larger one in a gated community. They had a son, Leo, They were, by all outside appearances, a happy family who had found love after shared tragedy. They were pillars of the community. They never spoke to Margaret. If they saw her in the grocery store, they would turn their carts and walk down another aisle. They treated her like she was the ghost, not me. My mother aged. The grief carved new lines into her face. Her strong, capable hands developed a tremor. She was no longer Friday Margaret. She was just that poor, crazy old woman. The town had moved on. The story was old news. Only she remembered. Only she kept a vigil. She would spend her Sundays walking the riverbank, her eyes scanning the water. She was looking for me. She told her friend once, "I just need to bring him home. I can't rest until my boy is home." And then, on a crisp October morning, 8 years and 4 months after I was taken from her, a college student named Ethan decided to go fishing. He was miles downstream in a slow, wide part of the river where silt and debris collected. His line snagged. He thought it was a log. He pulled, and from the cold, dark water, I returned. The discovery of a body in the river threw the town back into the story it had tried to forget. Dental records confirmed it was me. And the autopsy told a new story. It wasn't just a drowning. The hyoid bone in my neck was fractured, a classic sign of strangulation. There were defensive wounds on my forearms. I had fought for my life. The case was no longer an accident. It was a homicide. Detective Miller drove to my mother's house himself. He found her in the garden, listlessly pulling weeds. When he told her, she didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and nodded, a long, slow sigh escaping her lips. It was a sigh of a woman who had carried an unbearable weight for nearly a decade and had just been allowed to set it down. "I know," was all she said. The investigation was reopened with a new, grim intensity. Miller was a different man now. He looked at Margaret with a respect that bordered on awe. He pulled out the old files, her years of notes and theories, and read them not as the ramblings of a grieving mother, but as a meticulous work of the lead investigator on an unsolved murder. Amelia and Marcus were brought in for questioning. Their performance was less polished this time. The news that my own living was now a homicide had shaken their composure. Their story remained the same, a tragic slip, a frantic attempt to save me, but their eyes held a new flicker of fear. Miller pressed them. If he slipped and hit his head, how do you explain the fractured hyoid bone, Mr. Thorne? How do you explain the defensive wounds on his arms? Marcus blustered. We struggled. I was trying to pull him out of the water. He was panicking. He fought me. It was a plausible lie. Plausible enough. Anyway. But then, Miller brought up Margaret's conversation with Marcus at the diner, all those years ago. The red herring. He asked Marcus, "Mr. Thorne, is it true that Margaret Miller, the victim's mother, once told you that someone needed to do something drastic to get her son away from his wife?" A slow, calculating smile spread across Marcus's face. Amelia, sitting beside him, looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Yes," Marcus said, his voice heavy with false reluctance. "Yes, she did. She was very upset with Amelia. She said she wished someone would save David from her." The implication was poisonous. The investigation suddenly had a new, shocking angle. Could the grieving mother have been the mastermind all along? The new theory cast a dark shadow over the investigation. Margaret was brought in for questioning. She was confronted with her own words, twisted and reshaped into a confession of intent. She was horrified. "I was angry. I was grieving," she explained, her voice trembling with indignation. I would never harm my son." Miller believed her. He knew, deep down, who the real culprits were. But the district attorney, a man named Peterson with a perfect conviction record to maintain, saw only doubt. He laid it out for Miller in his office. "Look at it from a jury's perspective, Frank," Peterson argued. "You have the wife and the best friend with a consistent story. Then you have the mother-in-law who admittedly hated the wife, who had a financial motive to get her son away from the spendthrift Amelia, and who was heard suggesting someone should do something drastic. A good defense attorney would turn her into the villain. They'd paint her as a manipulative old woman who drove her son's best friend to an act of desperation. We'd lose. I can't risk it." And just like that, the case crumbled. The discovery of my body, the proof of my murder, it wasn't enough. The truth was not sufficient for the law. The district attorney announced he would not be pressing charges against anyone due to conflicting theories of the crime and insufficient evidence to secure a conviction. Amelia and Marcus were free. Legally, anyway. The news broke my mother. The fragile hope that had sustained her for 8 years was gone, and with it, her will to fight. Her health, which had been surprisingly resilient, began to fail. The fire in her eyes dimmed to embers, then to ash. She knew she was dying, and she knew she had one last thing to do. She asked my cousin Felon to drive her to the large, modern house on the hill where Amelia and Marcus lived. She walked up the stone path, leaning heavily on her cane, and rang the doorbell. Amelia answered the door. Her face, when she saw Margaret, was a mixture of shock and annoyance. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice cold. My mother didn't try to end her. She just stood on the doorstep, her small frame silhouetted against the setting sun. "I didn't come to fight Amelia," she said, her voice a quiet, weary whisper. "I came to tell you something." She looked past Amelia into the house I had paid for with my life, to where Marcus was standing in the hallway, watching. "You got away with it," Margaret said, her voice steady. "The law can't touch you. You'll live out your lives with my son's money. You will raise your child in a house bought with his blood. You have won." Amelia's expression softened into a smug, triumphant smile. But my mother wasn't finished. "But I want you to know," she continued, her gaze locking onto Amelia's, then moving to Marcus, "that I know, and the river knows, and every night, for the rest of your lives, when you close your eyes, you will see his face in the water. You will hear him calling for help, and you will know that I am watching you, and you will never, ever know peace." She turned then, without waiting for a reply, and walked slowly back down the path. It was the last time they ever saw her. My mother passed away 2 weeks later. She died peacefully in her sleep, in the house on Chestnut Street, in the bed she had once shared with my father. Her war was over. In the eyes of the world, she had lost. Her son had been unlived, and his killers walked free. But I was waiting for her, and I can tell you, she did not feel like she had lost. She was at peace. Years passed. Amelia and Marcus lived in their gilded cage. They had wealth, but they were prisoners of the town's suspicion. Their friends fell away. Their business ventures failed. Their son, Leo, when he was old enough to understand the whispers, the sideways glances, the story that would forever be attached to his family's name, grew to resent them. He left for college and never came back. Marcus started drinking, heavily. His charm curdled into a bitter, angry paranoia. He would spend his nights sitting on their expensive patio, staring out into the darkness, jumping at every sound. Amelia's beauty faded, replaced by a hard, brittle fear. They lived in a silent hell of their own making. Two people bound together not by love, but by a shared, unforgivable secret. One night, Marcus, in a drunken rage, finally confessed everything to Amelia. He screamed at her that it was all her fault, that she had pushed him, that he saw my face every time he closed his eyes. Their son, Leo, who had come home unannounced to pick up some old belongings, overheard everything from the next room. The next day, He went to Detective Miller, but it was too late. The statute of limitations on a new conspiracy charge had passed. A confession made in a private argument wasn't enough to overturn the DA's original decision. There would be no legal justice. But Leo knew the truth, and he made sure the world did, too. He didn't go to the police. He went to the local newspaper. He told them everything. The story, a long, detailed account of his parents' crime, was published on the front page. Amelia and Marcus became infamous. They couldn't go to the grocery store, the post office, the bank, without facing the cold, hard stares of a town that now knew for certain that they were killers. They were forced to sell their house and leave town in disgrace. Their final punishment was not a jail cell. It was the exile they had earned. My mother never got to see it, but her love, her relentless, unwavering belief in the truth, had planted a seed that, years later, finally broke through the surface. Justice doesn't always come from a gavel or a verdict. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, undeniable turning of time. Sometimes it comes from a mother's love, a force so powerful it can reach across the years, across the silence, even across the veil between worlds, to ensure that the river, in the end, gives up its dead, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, finally finds its way home. So do I have justice? Not in a courtroom, not in a prison cell. Amelia and Marcus will never be convicted by a jury of their peers. Their punishment is more subtle, more intimate. It's the prison of their own minds. It's the knowledge that their own son knows what they are and chose to walk away. It's the chilling reality that they destroyed 3 lives, mine, my mother's, and their own, all for a pile of money that can never buy them peace. They live now in a small, anonymous town in another state. They change their names, but they can't change their story. Sometimes, I see Marcus wake in the middle of the night, drenched in a cold sweat, the memory of the river fresh in his mind. I see Amelia staring at her own reflection in the mirror, searching for the beautiful, ambitious woman she used to be, and finding only a stranger with haunted eyes. They have each other, yes, but their company is a constant, bitter reminder of their shared sin. That is their life sentence. My mother's grave is on a hill overlooking the town. My cousin Felon visits every Sunday. He brings flowers from her old garden, which he now tends. He tells her about his week. He tells her he misses her. He tells her that he finally understands the depth of her strength. And sometimes, I imagine on a quiet spring morning, the wind whispers through the trees on that hill, and it carries a message from me to her. A message of gratitude. A message of peace. A message that says, "You can rest now, Mom. You brought me home. You made sure the world knew the truth." The river still flows, of course. It is indifferent to the small, tragic dramas that play out on its banks. But it holds memories. It holds stories. And if you listen closely on a quiet day, you can still hear the echo of a mother's love, a love that was stronger than betrayal, stronger than time, and in the end, even stronger than death itself. It is the only truth the river knows. It is the only truth that matters.